teleological sense. It's referred as literature, alright, but it still loses the location of literature in other frameworks. Now, the totality of a literary history can be constructed only by reductions of complexity, by exclusions, abstractions, generalizations, and above all by building a literary canon. The canon is an important tool for establishing cultural memory and collective identities. Literary history has a proclivity to treat only those works that fall under the narrowly defined category of literature proper. The criteria for such a decision, according to Herder, are arbitrary and dependent on changing in historical axioms. This raises issues regarding canon formation and periodization, and this paper tries to glance into 4 anthologies and map the contours of Indian literary historiography. Glance in the very sense of the term. Literature and Nationalist Ideology is a collection of 14 articles that raise issues and questions that have a bearing on the contested or interrogated notion of narrating a multilingual nation by taking into account the literatures of modern Indian language. And Hansard tries to point out that the triad called language, literature and nation are at the bottom of literary history. And the relevant question for Indian context would be, owing to the plurality of languages and literary traditions in India, can there be a rarefied category called a single national literature? Slogans like unity in diversity and the Sahitya Academies, Indian literature is one, though written in many languages, have tried to function as integrating mantras, but the language literature nation triad is dysfunctional in the case of India, as none of the language literatures of India can, as it were, claim to represent India as a whole. The majority of literary histories, Hans Herder claims, that are found in India are more histories of literature in one specific language than histories of Indian literature. And he says that regional patriotism and subnationalisms are the driving force behind these kind of literary histories. And an essay in this anthology by Uday Kumar titled Shaping a Literary Space, Early Literary Histories in Malayalam and the Normative Uses of the Past, points out how P. Govindapillai's Malayalam Bhasha Charithram 1881 is not really a history of the Malayalam language, but primarily a history of literature, which does not address the entire corpus of literary writing produced in Kerala. He points that there was Sanskrit literature which was produced in Kerala in the early centuries, before the emergence of the literature in Malayalam. And Kumar quotes this quotation from Ilankulam Kunjan Pillai in his Sahitya Charitra Sangram, which points that while sensuous Manipravalam poetry was emerging from theatres, Kotambalam, and houses of courtesans in Vaishyalia in the 13th and 14th centuries, sweet folk songs also echoed in the wide paddy fields and local shrines. So, literary history stands in relation to the literary field as a sort of parargon that frames the work. It is not only the past, but also the very shape of the present that is at issue here. And Uday Kumar also points out an existence of a variety of Malayalam that is known as Arabi Malayalam, in which the Arabic script is adapted through the addition of a number of additional orthographic signs to write Malayalam words. But this history, which Govinda Pillai points out, does not consider Arabi Malayalam as a part of the literary inheritance of Kerala. And he also points out that the contribution of Christian writers are also sidelined, recognized only in the last 2 centuries after the introduction of printing in Kerala. Uday Kumar points out that the shifting relations between the Nambudris and the Shudras thus provide a frame for conceiving the dynamism of Malayali culture. The frame that circumscribes the literary field is generated by establishing parallels between the nature of Malayalam language, history of caste society in Kerala, and the changing texture of Malayalam writing. Literary practices of the non-Hindus can find entry here only if they can be shown to participate in this cultural process in conformity with the terms that organize it. Hans Herder himself has written an essay in this volume called Indian Literature in English and the Problem of Naturalization, where he points that English literature is a challenge for Indian literary historiography. Because of the paradoxical status of English language in India, it is definitely non-Indian and it is a former colonial master's language, while on the other it is the only language that can at present claim the status of an all-India language. But there have been acrimonious dissensions regarding its status. While Rushdie would claim the superiority of post-independence Indian English literary achievements to those in vernaculars, almost outrageously, people like A.M. George, when editing a 1450-page volume on comparative Indian literature, would give a mere 19 pages to Indian writing in English. So, in an era when hybrid replaces the authentic one would be tempted to use the category called Indo-Angling literature as something like a hybrid which discredits authenticity, because authenticity would range from a sad misunderstanding to a fascist utopia. So Herder cautions that the hybridity is in danger of becoming a shared or ultimately void attribute that comes down to not much more than a recent globalized update of the hackneyed phrase unity in diversity. The second anthology which I would like to point out is Indigeneity, Culture and Representations. It is actually a collection of papers which are presented at the first Tokyo International Conference on Indigenous Peoples in the Post-Colonial World at IGNC in New Delhi, 2-5 January 2008. It forms volume 1 of the 2-volume collection. G.N. Devi in his introduction enlightens us that Chotra was the first global conference organized for literary scholars and social scientists engaged in a variety of indigenous communities in their own continents and